I definitely want to welcome you to our virtual Intro to Code. If you're sitting there feeling a little bit apprehensive due to your current coding knowledge, I want you to take a deep breath. And I want you to do a little bit of a stretch, hydrate, settle yourself down, and don't be worried. This introduction to code is designed for someone without any coding background whatsoever. We're merely just going to take a little bit of a dive into the HTML and CSS to give you a little taste of the code for yourself. If you find yourself asking, well, why is this? What if we do this? Or you find yourself a little bit curious on the subject that we are covering, hey, coding might just be for you. Website versus web app. Now, in your day-to-day life, you need not to know what the difference is. It doesn't change your internet journey whatsoever, but in our world, a website is something that is to display information to you, something that's going to be static. Things such as Wikipedia, Craigslist, blogging websites. Now, a web application, on the other hand, tends to be a little more complex, meaning websites like Facebook and Amazon and YouTube, things that are dynamic, that things can change. Now, throughout this intro to code, we're only going to be focusing on the website aspect of the code. Building a website, you typically have HTML and you have CSS. Now, the HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, while the CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. When we're talking about the HTML, that is very much like the foundation of a house. You have the studs, the walls, but we're not talking anything about the coloring of the walls, for example. That's where the CSS comes into play, our styling of the house. So those two combined gives you what you typically see when you visit a website visually. To further illustrate this concept of HTML being the bones or the foundation of the house, take a look at this website here. Believe it or not, this is the New York Times. However, we totally removed the CSS or the styling of the website. Now, as soon as we bring back the CSS, you can see that it looks a lot nicer, a lot cleaner, and it's what we would expect from the web page when we visit it. If we take a look at some of the examples that we see in this module down below with some photos, we can see what it would look like if we were to put on some coding goggles and looking at the website through a box model, meaning that a website can be broken up into several boxes or boxes within boxes in order to give the layout of the web page that you are actually seeing. And these boxes are broken down into code, what we call elements or tags. We're going to learn a lot more about this in the future modules. Welcome to the project build, and as we stated earlier during this introduction of this course, we're going to be building a portfolio. Now, during this build, you can actually follow along with some of the choices that we make for this project, but we also encourage you to try out things to kind of customize this portfolio that will suit your preferences, because maybe your navigation bar, you would much rather have a purple one, for example. So as we're going along, go ahead and make these kind of tweaks and adjustments throughout your project, because we always say that curiosity is a great thing for you to have, and it will also further motivate you to continue the learning throughout this introduction. So this is what the portfolio looks like, and let's go ahead and get started. So for this introduction to code, we're actually going to utilize a browser-based IDE or integrated development environment to teach you how to create the portfolio utilizing HTML and CSS. The website that you will need to visit is called codepin.io, and here is where we're going to go ahead and get signed up. Now, the reason that we're suggesting you to get signed up is because this is going to allow you to save your project or save your progress as you go along. CodePen is free for our needs. So what you're going to do is you're going to go up here, you're going to click on the sign up, and you're going to follow the instructions on signing up. You have several automatic versions of signing up, whether that be Twitter, GitHub, or Facebook, or you can even click here to sign up with an email. Here you're going to enter your name, your username, and email, and you're going to choose a password. Once you click on the submit, you should be okay to continue on. Once you sign in for the very first time, you may be presented with something that's like this. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click on the X right here, and we're going to click on the box up in the top left. Once we click on that, you'll be presented with this. And if we go over here to the pen, and we're going to go ahead and create a brand new pen by clicking on this icon right here. And now we are ready to start our project. One of the things that we want to do is if we come over here to the JavaScript editor, we can actually click on the drop-down menu, and we're going to click on the thing that says Minimize JavaScript Editor. Once you do that, you're going to see that it's collapsed. We're not going to talk about the JavaScript editor. We're mainly going to be dealing with the HTML and CSS. So this is where we're going to edit our HTML code. Over here is where we're going to edit our CSS code. And this window down here that you'll see is going to automatically update anything that we type or we alter in these two boxes live for us. So it is very much like a live browser preview of our code. So now that you are oriented on the CodePen, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section. All right, so let's go ahead and start coding. For right now, we're going to mainly focus in on the HTML section, and we're going to introduce you to a few terms and processes and patterns that you're going to see as you are playing around with HTML and CSS. So HTML is very much like I always tell students, like a Word document. It's going to look like a Word document until we apply CSS to our HTML. So let's go ahead and start our very first, what we call is tag. We're going to create a tag, and whenever we create tags in HTML, we always need to have what's called an opening tag and a closing tag. And it's going to look something like this, where we can go ahead and type the word nav with those gators. And I'm going to hit the enter key a couple times, and I'm going to put a closing tag on there. All right. So this right here is what's considered an open tag, and here is the closing tag. Now you're not going to see anything really change on your screen, and that's because the nav tag is really an HTML element that represents a section of our page to really provide us with organization as HTML coders. Also, as browser interpolators, you will see that it will know what the navigation section is on the web page for things such as screen readers. So that's pretty neat as well. But things that typically go in there are like menus, tables, contents, indexes, those kind of things inside of your nav. We're going to use it as a navigational bar, and we're going to put in here what we call our UL tags. All right. Now, usually we always ask the question, what does UL stand for? And one of the best ways to kind of learn about things is Google. Google's always a developer's very best friend. And if you don't know what a UL is, this is what we would actually type into Google. And we can say, for example, what does the UL stand for in HTML? And it stands for an unordered list. Okay, so let's go ahead and build our unordered list. And notice that we have an opening tag and a closing tag. All right. So things that go inside of an unordered list are things called list items. All right. And so in here, we're just going to do li tags. And again, remember, we're doing opening and closing li. All right. And I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it and paste it. I'm going to have 3 LIs on there. And if you look at our preview down here, you're going to notice that we have 3 dots. Okay. Does that sort of remind you a little bit of a Word document? Okay. That's what it's going to look like for now until we apply CSS. In the first LI, we're going to go ahead and put in your name. So I'm going to put John Coder. And then the next one, we're going to do contact. And then the last one, we're going to go ahead and do about. Okay. So once I have all that done, I'm going to go ahead and click on this Save button. And that is going to be my nav bar so far with just our unordered list and list items. All right, so now that we have our list items in here, we need to make these hyperlinks. And in order to do that, we're going to introduce a new tag to you called the A tag. All right, so I'm going to delete John Coder for now. So highlighted it, I'm going to hit the delete button, and I still want those LIs, but I want to make it so that if I were to click on John Coder or your name, that it would do something. So in order for us to create a hyperlink, we're going to create that A tag. And there's a great shortcut that I'm going to introduce to you now in CodePen, which is called emit, where it can auto-complete for us. So I'm going to hit the A key, and I'm going to hit the tab. And automatically you can see that it gave me what we call as an A tag, an A, and a closing A. Okay. Inside of this thing called an href, I'm going to go ahead and type in there with the # or the hashtag, and I'm going to type the word home. And then inside, in between the A's, you're going to go ahead and type in your name. So John Coder. Okay. And I'm going to do almost the exact same thing to these others that are down here. And notice that we do get a hyperlink. John Coder turned blue and it had an underline underneath. So I'm going to delete contact. I'm going to hit the A key, hit the tab, and now I'm going to do hashtag contact. And then in between the A tags, okay, I'm going to type contact. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the about. Again, we're just trying to show you that there's a little bit of a pattern when it comes to developing. And I'm going to create another A tag, hit the tab, and I'm going to hit the hashtag, and I'm going to type the word about. All right, so we should see now in our preview that we have 3 hyperlinks. We can hover over it. Notice that our mouse cursor now has a finger to indicate that it is a link. And now what we would like to do is we're going to be adding classes and IDs to our code. So before we can start applying some cool styling to our browser down here, we will need to come up with ways to kind of target these items, to target our navbar, to target these items on here of John Coder, contact, and about. So this is what we're going to do next. We're going to add an attribute to our nav section, and we're going to call that a class. And we're going to set that equal to navbar. And then on the very first LI, we're going to create an ID. So an ID is another way that we can target a certain item or a certain tag with CSS. And we're going to see that here in the next video. But we're going to call this one brand. We are going to add a class to our A tags. Okay, so I'm going to call this one class equals, and then we're going to call it nav-link. And we're going to do the same exact thing to each one of these. We're going to add a class, and we're going to call it nav-link. And the same thing for the about. Class equals nav-link. Okay. So one of the things that you're going to learn with HTML is that a class is sort of like a generalization of a group. We can have several classes with the same name. But when it comes down to IDs, we can only have one item with the name of brand, for example. If I had another ID for this one called brand, HTML would kind of get confused to know which one did we want to target. So a great way if we need to target an individual item is we give it an ID. And if we're trying to target a group of things, that's when we want to use the keyword class and give it a name. So we're going to see what we can do with the classes and the IDs in the next video. Okay, so now we're going to move into the world of CSS, and we're going to want to make sure that we're going to click over here into the CSS tab, and that's where you're going to see that flashing cursor. And if you remember our analogy that the HTML is the bones of the body, the CSS is really the skin. This is what provides it with every single thing that you will visually see on your browser to make it look a lot more eye-pleasing. And in the CSS, we're able to target specific things in our HTML structure that you'll kind of see the pattern with. So the very first thing that we would like to do is we would like to have a navigational bar up here, and the color of our navigational bar is going to be green, and we want to put that navigation bar up at the top left corner of our web page, and that's where our links are going to kind of live. So if we take a look at our HTML structure, because we have these opening and closing nav tags, that's what we're going to go ahead and target. So because we're targeting the tag itself of nav, we can go ahead over in the CSS and type the word nav, and we're going to hit the space bar, and we're going to put curly brackets in there. So I'm going to hit the enter key to give us some room, and the very first thing that we're going to visually see is we need to change the background color. Now, all of our tags have a CSS property associated with it that we're going to kind of describe. That's what we're doing in the CSS. We're kind of describing what we want the nav section to kind of look like. So we're going to start off with the background color. So we have a key property in the CSS world called background color. So I'm going to spell it out here. Background, and it's going to be dash color. And then we want to put a colon on there. So that tells the CSS, hey, whatever follows this colon is going to be of some sort of value. Now, when it comes to background colors or colors in general, we have what we can call our hex colors. You'll see in the documentation in the Canvas course down below that W3 Schools has something that's pretty neat for Color Picker, and it allows you to pick and choose colors of your choice. And in this example here, we're going to choose this hex code here, and for now I'm going to go ahead and copy it so I don't have to type it again, but you all will have to go ahead and type it. And we can tell the CSS that, hey, we want to use a hex code by using the pound sign or the hashtag followed by a series of numbers or letters. And instantaneously, you'll kind of see our nav bar kind of take shape. Now, after every single property and value that we put on here, we're always going to want to put a semicolon. That's where it's going to be the dot and then the comma. So that's the semicolon. We're going to be using that very frequently throughout this demonstration. And all CSS requires this to happen. It tells the program, hey, we are finished with that thought. We're finished with that key value. And go ahead and move on to the next property. So we got the background color. The next thing that we would like to do is we would like to tell that nav bar what position do we want to have it at. So there's multiple values that can be used, and in this case we're going to use the word fixed, and we're going to put a semicolon. What this position fixed will do, it will hold our nav bar at the very top of our page, and you'll definitely notice what's going on down there in the bottom of our preview that you see there. The next thing that we kind of need to address is, we see a gap over here at the far left and the top. And that is because all HTML pages come with default settings on it. And we need to tell, in the CSS, we need to tell that nav bar, hey, we don't want to use those margins. So we're going to go ahead and add 2 more properties on here. The first one, we're going to do top, and we're going to set that to 0. And then we're going to do left, and we're going to set that to 0. And notice that our white gap is now gone. Now the 2 things left on at least getting this to look like a nav bar is going to be what is the height and what is the width. So let's go ahead and add those 2 properties. So we're going to do height. We're going to set that to 50 pixels. Okay. And pixels is exactly what it kind of sounds like from what we're familiar with, but it's just a setting on your computer to tell the browser how many pixels should this take up. And so that's one way to define dimensions. All right, the next thing that we want to do is we want to add a width. So we're going to do width with the colon, and then we want this to be 100 VW. So the VW stands for view width, which means that we want to take up 100% of the view width of whatever device we're using. So think about this as your desktop has a different view width compared to your mobile device. And we want to utilize 100% of that view width. And then the very last property that we're going to put on the nav bar is something called a z-index. And we want that to be 1. So think of this as a layered cake, and we are telling the browser we want this nav bar to be on top of anything so far that we have put on here. So we're giving it a high priority, a high cake layer, so it always stays on top. All right, so that is our nav section, and we're seeing that we have a few of these list items in here that don't kind of look like a nav bar quite yet. We're going to be addressing that here next. All right, so we're going to target the list items or the LIs that you see right here that are inside the nav section only. And we can target those in CSS by utilizing something called a CSS combinator. And we are going to be very descriptive when we tell it what LIs do we want it to be. So let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to do that. If we take a look at the structure here, we have a nav tag followed by a UL tag followed by an LI tag. So that's what we're going to do inside the CSS. We're going to target the nav. We're going to then target the ULs, and then we're going to target the LIs. And as long as it matches that pattern in the HTML, anything that we type in here is going to be followed with adjusting the properties that we get to visually see. So things that we would like to do is we would like to float this to the right. And let's see what that does. You can see that it shoved everything into a single block, and it kind of smushed things together. So let's next give us some spacing here in between each one of these words. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use the property called margin right. And we want to apply a 50 pixel spacing to that. So that looks good so far. The next thing that we would like to do is we would like to get rid of the dots. And that property in CSS is called list style type. And we want to set that to none. And then the very last step here is where you want to do a text align, and we want to make that to be the center. Now have our second set of code for CSS targeting the nav section. Now the next thing that we are going to do is we're going to kind of make the name go all the way to the left-hand side. And we're going to want to change some of the colors of these as well. So that's what we're going to do next. So we want to move the name, your name, over to the left side of the nav bar. If we take a look at the HTML that we have, if we look at our name, what do we see as something that is identifying this line of code compared to the rest of these? So if I look at that here, we created a class that has navlink, a class that has navlink, a class that has navlink. All those look the same. The one thing that's different is we have this list item with an ID of the word brand. So in CSS, we can target IDs as well as classes, but in this case right here, we're going to target the ID. Now, a good way to kind of remember how do we do that in CSS? Well, if we're going to identify a class, we're going to start off with a period. If it's an ID, we're going to use the pound sign. So another way to kind of look at this is all classes in school have periods, and IDs are typically numbers, and they have number signs. So that's a good way to kind of remember if you are trying to target an ID, what are you going to use over here in the CSS to target that? Well, it's going to be the pound sign or the hashtag. And then we're going to type out the name of the ID. And so in this case, it's brand. We're going to open up the curly brackets. And the way that we're going to take our name and shove it all the way to the left is we're going to use, again, the float property. And in this case, we want to go left. And that will take our name and shove it all the way to the left side. All right. Okay, the next thing that we would like to do is we would like to adjust the color of these links here. So if you see, if I hover my mouse over these are links. They're not changing color, and they really kind of clash with the green. So again, let's go ahead and see what do we have over here so far listed that we can kind of target all three of these. And guess what? Each one of these has a class, and that's what we're going to target. And again, all classes have periods, which means that in CSS we can do the period and then type out the name, nav-link. And then we're going to open up those curly brackets and we're going to type out our properties. So the first thing is we're going to do color. And again, this is where you can go into your hex color if you have a different background than what I have. You can choose a different hex number. In this case, I'm going to use the hashtag of 0A122A. And that kind of gave it a nice darker green to go about it. The next thing that we would like to do with this is we would like to remove the underline part, right? So it doesn't look much like a nav bar unless we can remove the underlines that you see right here on the about and the contact. And the way that we can do that is we can do text decoration, and we can set that to none. And that will remove those. And then the last thing that we can do is we can provide a font family. And I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here and kind of talk about it as you all are typing it. But we can specify that we can provide it with a font family. So the property is font-family. And we can say, hey, we would like the first font for us to try, if the browser can support it, is Acme. Now, if your browser does not have that, this is the default, and every typical browser will have this at least. So, rule of thumb, it's always good to supply a default just in case the browser doesn't support the first one that you have. All right. So the fourth and final set of CSS for the navigational section is going to be targeting the links on when we actually hover over it. As you can see right now, it doesn't really do anything besides change our mouse pointer to a hand clicking pointer. But we would like to change the color on a hover. We'd also like to maybe increase the font size of our name and maybe change the color of it as well. So those are the things that we're going to do. So let's go ahead and first work on the color change whenever we hover over things. So in order to do that, we are going to again target the nav link. So we're going to do .nav-link, and we want to add a selector to this. So we're going to put a colon here, and we are going to specify that, hey, this CSS that we're getting ready to write is only going to be valid when we are hovering these items. So one of the first things that we would like to do is we would like to have the color be somewhat of a light blue. So we're going to do color colon, and instead of a hex code, CSS does have some properties and some colors that you can possibly think of where we can just physically type the name of the color, whether that be pink, red. In this case, we want it to be light blue. So we're going to type the words light blue and hit the semicolon. The next thing that we're going to do is we want to visually not only do the color change, but we want to make it bold. And in order to do that, we can do font weight, and we can set that to bold. So now when we hover over our nav links, you'll notice that we now get the color change, and you can see that the font weight is actually making it bold. pretty neat. The next thing that we would like to do is we would like it if we can increase the size of our name to make it a little more pronounced. And to do that, we're going to use that thing that we learned before, which is the CSS combinator. And the way that we're going to target it is going to be the following. We want to first utilize the ID, and then we want to say, hey, this ID combined with the nav link should be a font size a little bigger. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say, hey, the ID, so it's going to be brand. We're going to hit the space bar, and then we're going to do the class. .nav-link. And as long as it matches that, we would like this to have a font size of 14 points. And notice that it increased in size. The other thing that we would like to do is we would like the color to be light blue all the time, not just on hover. So that's another way that we can adjust those properties, and we have identified that in the HTML, again, utilizing the brand and the nav link. So as long as those two match, that's what we're targeting. And notice that these over here, the about and the contact, were not affected by the font size. And then the last thing that we would like to do is on the hover aspect of our name, we would like that to be other than the light blue. So let's go ahead and do the following. Again, we're going to target it with the brand. We're going to use our class, which is nav-link. And remember, we want to affect the hover effect of this. So we're going to add a colon and then the hover. So now we can say, hey, when we hover over this, we want it to utilize this hex code instead of the blue. And so you can see that we have changed it back to the darker green that we see here without the hover. So with this introduction to CSS on the nav bar, you have learned quite a great deal of different CSS properties and how we can target them. We're going to learn more once we get to the main section, but follow along in the next videos and we'll see what is to follow. So you can see here with our finished model, we just got done with doing the nav bar. The next thing that we want to do is we want to have a nice header section right below our navigation set. So that's what we're going to work on next. We're going to get the text on there, and then we're going to apply styling, and then we're going to have a background change. So that's what we're going to be working on in these next modules. So now we're going to go back to the HTML side, and we're going to have our header section. So to do that in the HTML, we're going to type out header, and then of course we need the closing tags that are associated with that. So now that we have the header identified in the HTML, traditionally you can utilize what we call our header tags, and HTML kind of gives us 6 of these, and they're indicated with an H1 through an H6. There is no H7, 8, 9, or 10. It's just H through 6. They give you common sizing, but you can kind of see over here on the far right, that's what each one of these things do as far as the header tags go. A tip down here, it says use the H1 through H6 for headings only. Great for screen readers. Do not use them for just making text bold or big. Kind of use other tags for that. So anyways, we're going to be utilizing an H1 tag and an H3 tag, and that way we will be able to display the nice to meet you, and then I'm the CSS to your HTML in our header. So let's go ahead, go back to the code, and to do this here, we're going to do H1 and then hit the tab button, and we're going to put on here nice to meet you, exclamation mark. Now we don't actually see the text anywhere, and it's really because our nav bar that we have up here is kind of blocking it, but we're going to fix that. On the next line, I'm going to do H3 in the tab button, and I'm going to go ahead and type, I'm the CSS to your HTML. Now, things that we want to do to kind of give this some HTML styling without CSS, we have something called making the text italic. And to tell the code that, we have to wrap the word with opening and closing tags of the letter I. So let's see what that looks like. So we're going to do an I, and then we're going to come over here and put the closing I tag on there. And notice that the CSS is now italicized and nothing else in there is. We're going to do the same exact thing to the HTML with the opening I tag and the closing I tag. All right, so that gave us our nice italicized words with just the CSS and the HTML. And the next thing that we need to do to allow us to target these items with CSS, we're going to give the H1 and H3 the same class name. So we're going to do class equals, and it's going to be header dash tag. We're going to do the exact same thing for the H3. Class equals, and then header dash tag. All right. So again, we can kind of see it if we zoom in here, right there. We see the bottom of the nice to meet you. So it's being blocked by the nav section. Again, we're going to fix all this with CSS in the next module. All right, so we already have our HTML with the nice to meet you and the the CSS to your HTML over here structured in our HTML section. This video here, we're going to be targeting the H1 tag, we're going to be targeting the header tag class, and just getting that nice and presentable. Again, because right now all we're seeing is really just HTML with zero CSS work being applied to the header section here. The very first thing that we're going to target is our H1 tag. All right. We're going to say, hey, you know what, H1, I would like you to have the font size of 60 points. All right, so now we can actually see it on our screen. That's good. And then for the font family, we want the exact same thing that we did before, which is up here. If we scroll, we're going to go ahead and copy this entire line that you see right here, my line 25 of font family, and we're going to apply that right there. All right, so you can see that not only did we adjust the size of the font, but we also adjusted the font family. And remember, the way that font family works is we're going to try Acme, And then the default backup, in case the browser does not support that font, is going to be the secondary font that you see right there. So that is what we're going to do for the H1. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create an ID over here on the HTML, and we're going to make sure that that says home, because we want to target that over here in the CSS. So I'm going to come over here, and remember, if we're targeting IDs over there in the HTML, it starts with the # or the hashtag followed by the name itself. So it's called home. I'm going to open up the curly brackets and do the following. So what I would like to do for this is I would like to grab a background file to kind of make the header section look a little nicer. So to do that, we're going to apply a background. So I'm going to go ahead and type background, and I'm going to put in there a colon. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to type the keyword URL and put parentheses in there with the single string marks, or they look like apostrophes, and I'm just going to leave it like that. I'm going to move my cursor all the way to the right, and I'm going to type out the rest of the stuff that we kind of need for this. And I'm going to say, you know what, once we get the picture that we want to make sure that it is centered on our background. We would like to have it at 75%, and we would want to make sure that our background does not repeat. And then the last thing is we would like to have the background to be fixed, and then I'm going to put a semicolon. Now you're not going to see anything change until we actually apply a photo to this. So for this example in this lesson, we're going to go over to unsplash.com. This is where you can get a little bit creative. You can choose your own images. I'm going to go ahead and choose the word flower, and then I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to navigate to the flowers that are going to be used in this module, and I'm going to find that photo. Now again, you can pick any photo that you wish. Once you click on the photo, you'll see a big high resolution photo of this. We're simply just going to right click it, and we need to choose the image address. So again, we're right clicking the image, copy image address, and now we can go back into CodePen. So where are we going to paste this at? It's on our clipboard. We're going to put it right here in between those two little tick marks that we called apostrophes, and we're going to simply paste it. You can do Control V, you can do Command V on a Mac, or you can even right click and hit paste, and you'll see that we now have a background image. Pretty neat. So at the end of this entire line of code, you'll see that that semicolon, that's where we're going to be. I'm going to hit the Enter key because we have to add a few more properties to this. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, you know what? The margin on the top, we want it to be kind of shoved down just a little bit. And so we're going to do 50 pixels. The next thing that we want to do is we want to do a position, and we want that to be relative. The next thing that we want to do to kind of clean things up is we want the left side, we're going to do a -8 pixels. And you can kind of see that in CodePen it kind of shifted everything to the left for us. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to choose a width, and we want to set that to 100 view width. The next thing that we're going to do is the height. We're going to set a fixed height of 30 view height, VH. We're going to do the padding on the top. We're going to set that to 3 AM. There we go. And the very last thing that we're going to do on here is we're going to do a background size, and we want to change that to cover. All right, so those are the property settings that we're going to need in order to make our background kind of pop and be flush against the navigation bar for you to view. Now, again, you can play around with the background as far as you don't have to use that same image that we did in this video lesson or this module. You can gear it towards your own. All right. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to kind of clean up the header that we see here, which is the nice to meet you, and then the CSS to your HTML. We're going to make that look a little cleaner. All right. So that's what's coming up next. Okay, so how are we going to clean these items up? Well, notice that we have a class that we created called header tag. And say we wanted to center these items. Well, let's go ahead and do that right now. So again, we're going to target the class. Classes start with the dot, and we're going to spell out the class name, which is header-tag. We're going to open up the curly brackets, and we want to do text align, and we want to set that to center. There we go. Now it's nice and centered. The next thing that we would like to do is we would like to apply a color to this. So we're going to do color, and we're going to use the hashtag method, and we're going to utilize a color that we've been using the entire time, which is 0A122A. And we should see a color change. The next thing that we would like to do is we would like to apply a text shadow. So we're going to do text-shadow. And we want to apply a 2 pixel by 2 pixel by 2 pixel. And the color that we would like the shadow to be is black. And that will make the text kind of pop off the page a little bit. Now, the next thing that we're going to want to do is we would like to kind of get this CSS, the I am the your CSS to your HTML, a little bit closer to the nice to meet you. So we can do that by doing the following. We can say, hey, any H3 tag that happens to have the class of header tag, well, I want you to be a little bit closer, and I'm going to reduce your margin from it. So I'm going to take the margin top of it, and I'm going to apply a negative value on it to bring it up some. And then we're also going to increase the font size. So we're going to do font size, and we're going to set that to 18 points. And there you go. We have now successfully cleaned up our header. And remember what it looked like before to what it kind of looks like now. Our page is shaping up quite nicely. Now we're going to move into the main content area where we're going to add a photo and add some generic text talking about ourselves, right? So that's going to be in the following modules. So if you remember from the very first start of all of these modules, we kind of gave you this idea right here. This is what we're trying to create. So we've completed the header section. Now we're going to be talking about the about section, which is what you see right here. We're highlighting it in a box for you, but we want to have a profile picture. We want to have an about section, and then we can see our name right there. Where on here it says John Coder. We want that to be a nice header type of tag, and then some content below that. So that's what we're going to kind of do. And when we're thinking about how are we going to lay things out, I'm going to explain to you about the tags and the division that we're trying to create when we're going to be going through this. All right, so that's what we're going to learn here. We're going to introduce you with a new tag for the image tag. We're going to be creating div tags with some meaning that we need some classes and IDs to go along with that so that we can target them with some CSS. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so for this video section here, we're going to be mainly dealing with the HTML side of things. I'm going to be giving you some CodePen shortcuts in order to complete what we want and what we need. If your auto completion is not working for you in CodePen, hey, no worries. You do have the ability to pause the video at any time to make sure that you have the code correct. So I'm going to continue on with our HTML at the very bottom, and that's where we're going to start writing all this code. So I'm going to start scaffolding out what I wanted to get out of the About section. So I know that I want to start off with a div tag, and I'm going to, for right now, I'm going to give that a class of main. So in order to do that in CodePen, I'm going to type div. Because it's a class, I want to hit the dot, and then I want to type out my class name. And when I do that and hit the tab button, you'll notice that I now have a div tag with a class of main, and now I can hit the enter key. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is I want to have a section tag with the ID of about. And the reason that I want to create that is if you remember in our nav bar section up here, if I click the about, I would love to go and scroll down to the about section. So that's really why we want to have that. So I'm going to type the word section, and then again, I wanted this to be an ID of about. So I'm going to use the hashtag and type the word about, and I'm going to hit the tab button. All right, so that created a section tag, and it automatically gave me an ID with an equaling to about. All right, so if you remember from our beginning photo, we wanted to have the image on the left side and then the about content on the right. So I'm going to create two divisions for that, one to house the picture, and then another one to house the about content. So let's go ahead and do that next. So again, I want to create a division, so a div tag with the ID of about picture. So I'm going to type the word about dash picture and hit the tab button. And then I'm going to do another div tag, and I want this ID to be about and then content. So I'm going to hit the tab button, and now I have my two divs that I need. Okay. All right, so now that we have the two divs and we have the about, it's time to go ahead and put in the image. So we had the image on the left, so that comes first. I'm going to hit the enter key here, give us some space. I'm going to type img and hit the tab button. Inside the src, I'm just going to type out, for right now, image here. We're going to talk about that here shortly. I just don't want to junk up my code because I want you all to follow along. We're going to come back and actually place a real image here real shortly. All right, now the next thing, in the div and about content, I need to have an h2 tag followed by two paragraph tags. So for this, I'm going to do h2, hit the tab. This is where I'm going to type out my name. I'm going to have this called John Coder. And then the next two tags that we need to have is we're going to do a p tag. And then inside the p tag, we're going to add some lorem ipsum text. And CodePen gives us the ability to have a lorem ipsum generator. And what this will do for us, you will see that once we type the word LOREM and hit the tab button, it gives us an auto completion of a lot of text. And what that gives us as a developer, it just gives us a placeholder to view what a paragraph tag kind of might look like. So I'm going to do another p tag, and I'm going to do another lorem and hit the tab button. Okay. So now that we have our John coder and we have the 2 paragraphs, now it's time to actually add the photo that we need. And in the module, you will see an image URL that you can go ahead and copy to your clipboard. So you'll have to highlight it, copy it to your clipboard, and you see where I have up here where it says image here. I'm going to double click the whole thing, hit the delete button, and I'm going to paste the image URL that we are using. Now, I highly suggest that you use the image that we are providing with you in the modules, because it is sized exactly how we are going to need in order for it to look nice, utilizing the CSS properties in a future video. So this is what your code should look like in the About section for the HTML. Again, we added a new tag that you haven't heard of, which is the image tag. It takes the source attribute, which is the URL for a photo. And then in the alt section here, we can actually fill this out here, and we can call it profile pic. Okay, so we can put that in there as well. You're not going to see anything visually happen on your screen, but the alt is used for either screen readers, or if the image is damaged or could not be found, it will show the alternative text in its place of what should actually be there. All right. The other thing that you should have got out of this video is that we created a brand new section here called About, and it has 2 divisions in there. We have a place for the picture, and we have a place for the content. All right. So continue on with the next video. If you have any questions, and if you needed some things that were needed to be copied or pasted, please review the module. It has every single thing that you need. All right, so now we're going to be fixing everything that you see visually with that large profile picture. We're going to kind of shrink that down and get our text lined up and everything else. So let's go ahead and get started with it. So the elephant in the room is going to be this picture here, and we kind of need to set up some boundary limits with it. And if you notice that we kind of have an image tag right here that you see on my line 17, and then we have like a container box, which is called a div with the ID of About picture. So the way to kind of think about this is we need to tell that image, hey, we're going to give you a box to live in, and you can't go outside that box, but we first need to define the box. So with that being said, let's go ahead and first target the box first, which is the About picture. So in CSS, we're going to hit the hashtag, and we're going to type out about-picture. And inside the curly braces, we need to say, hey, you know what? Your box limit is going to be a width of 30 of the view width. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and put a colon there and a semicolon at the end. So once we have that, the next thing that we're going to say in here, we're going to say, hey, you need to be on the left-hand side of this web page. So we're going to say float left, and then we're going to hit the semicolon. So we can already see that if we can imagine a box right here, and the text is shoved up right against it, right? So the image is spilling outside of the box. We need a way to tell that image, hey, you need to be a certain size if you're going to be inside this box. You can't go outside the box. So the best way to do that is we need to target the image. So if we take a look at the HTML, we can go about several ways, but really the easiest, best way is to go ahead and give it an ID. And so I'm going to go ahead and do an ID equals, and then we're going to make that profile-pic. So that way, over here in the CSS, we can do hashtag profile dash pic, and now we can kind of define the limits for this profile picture. The first thing that we're going to say is like, hey, profile picture, we don't want you to be any bigger than the 300 pixels. So we're going to say a height of 300 pixels. And we're also going to give you a width of 300 pixels as well. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to provide a nice border radius on here as well. So the next line that we're going to do is we're going to do border dash radius, and we're going to set that to 0.4 EM. And if you take a look at the image, we kind of rounded the corners. Again, play with these values, see if you like them. In this case, we're going to stick with the 0.4 EM. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to provide a box shadow. So we're going to do box shadow. And we're going to make it 2 pixels by 2 pixels by 2 pixels. And we want that to be black. You can kind of see that it created a nice little border there. All right, so the next thing that we would like to target is we would like to change the color of the John Coder section, the name. All right, so again, in order to target it, we're just going to say it's an H2 tag that you see there in the HTML. And we want your color to be, in this case, we're going to do 5B8067. And you can see that it turned green. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we want to make that font family to be what we've been using this entire time, which is Acme. And if you don't have Acme, then we'll do a sans serif. Okay. All right. So that looks good for the H2. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make our text alignment to be in the center. And anything that is in the main section, which is the picture and the text, we're going to go ahead and center everything. So the way to do that, main is a class, so we're going to do .main. And we're going to just do text align center. And that centered things up. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're just going to apply some margin to the about section. So we're going to say, hey, about section. Let's go ahead and adjust your top margin to give it a little bit of spacing. And we want that to be 50 pixels. You can see that it shoved it down just a little to make it a little more eye-pleasing. And then the next thing that we want to do is we want to make the display go inline block. And that's just to clean things up a little bit. And then the last thing that we're going to target is the content. We're just going to define the view width, and then we're going to make sure that it floats to the right. So if we look at the about content, it is an ID. So we're going to use the hashtag and about content. And in here, we're going to do width. And we want to set that to 40 VW. And then we're going to float it to the right. And there you go. Now your about section is cleaned up. It looks exactly how we wanted from our very first module. All right. In the module, we're going to have all of the code for the HTML as well as the CSS. So if you've been following along from the very beginning, you'll know exactly what code that we put in. All right, so in this lesson tutorials, we are going to create a soundboard that is very similar to what we see over here. And we're going to provide you with all the icons and sound files that are going to be required for this. But you can see here that we have 5 buttons that are on here, and we can click any one of them and we will be able to play the sound. So for example, if we want a door close, we can click on the W. If we want to hear the keys jingle, we will type the D button. So this is what we plan on making throughout these few short tutorials with utilizing HTML. We're only going to provide you with the JavaScript file that's already written that kind of makes this work. But as far as the design, the background, the images, we're all going to give those to you. We're just going to write the HTML file code in order to get the JavaScript to work with our file. All right, but we're going to start with a blank slate and work with CSS and HTML. All right, so before we get started, just wanted to do a real quick orientation on the code sandbox, just in case you're not familiar with it. Over on the right-hand side, we have the browser preview. All right, so any type of editing that we will be doing with our code editor, we should be able to see the final product over here once we save the file. Over here is all of our file folders that you can see. Over here is images. We provide all the images. There's the door, there's the drums, and so on. As far as the sound, you can see that we have M4As for the audio files. So we have the door closing, the keys, the locks, the tapping, and so on over in the sound folder. Most of the time, you're not going to have to worry about these unless we're trying to reference the actual name of the file. We will reference it later on in the code. We have the HTML file that we're going to be mainly working in, along with the CSS file that is going to be referenced in this video. The JavaScript file we are not going to touch at all in this video. We provide you with it. Remember that JavaScript provides the actions in your browser for it to function. So when we were clicking on those button icons, it was the JavaScript that's actually kind of running the files and everything. So anyways, this course right here is just going to mainly focus on the HTML as well as the CSS to give you what we just saw earlier. So you are given a blank slate, and we're going to start our work in the HTML file. All right, so now that we're in our index.html file, so if we just double click that, we should be able to see that on here. And let me go ahead and break down this file just with the basic information that you were given. That way we can all start with a fresh baseline on a level of understanding. So up here in the head section of the HTML, that's where we can put things like our CSS reference sheet. And that you can see that here on line 6. We are essentially just saying, hey, we have a style sheet and it's located right here. So it's named styles.css, styles.css. If we would to rename this over here, we would have to update this over here. So it is linking this style sheet to this HTML page and says, hey, anything that's on this styles.css page, you need to apply the stylings to from that. And we always want to include that in the head section. Now, the next thing that will come here, which is the soundboard. And really, this is what gives you those browser titles. So for example, if I were to pop open this browser in a new window, you'll see up here at the very top, which you probably won't be able to see, but I'll drag down. You'll see here in the tab, we have the soundboard. So that's where that title actually comes from. So if you were to change this title here, it would actually change the name that we see in the tab for the page title. And then we have the body, right? We have body tags. And inside the body, at the very end, we have the JavaScript script. And that's just letting the HTML page know, hey, once you get done loading, hey, there's a JavaScript file that needs to be referenced. And so we always try to keep that at the end of the body, just to make sure that once that page loads, because a computer reads from top to bottom, that it needs to go ahead and load the JavaScript file that's associated with this HTML file for all those sound files to kind of work. All right, so that gives you a real quick orientation of the HTML file. And you can see right here in the styles.css file, it's blank, right? And one of the first things that we'll go ahead and attack here is we would like to change the background color of the body to that gray that we saw. And in order to do that, in the styles.css, I'm going to double click that to make sure that it is live and open for us. I'm going to type the word body because that's what we want to actually attack here in the CSS. So we would like to have the background color, and you can notice that the auto sensing is picking up in this code editor. And I'm going to go ahead and click on background-color. And well, what color do we want? For this, I'm going to provide you with a hash number or hex number. And I'm going to do 485460. And that will kind of give us a nice gray for the background. And if you're not seeing it over here, which I'm not as well, we're going to go ahead and save it. So I'm going to hit Control S on Windows or Command S on a Mac, and that should save it. Otherwise, you can always come over here and go to click that little hamburger menu, go to File, and then click Save All. And that should kind of work for you. So with one line of code already, we have a background color of the gray that we were looking for. All right. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go back to the index.html file. And let's go ahead and create a title for us. And we're going to use the H1 tag. So we're going to type H1. Hit the tab button, and you notice that it auto completes the closing and opening tags on this. I'm going to go ahead and type out soundboard. All right. Now, if you noticed before, I had like a little musical note in there, and you are able to type emojis on here, believe it or not. And if you're not familiar with how do you get the emojis, well, I have this here pulled up. If you're on Windows, you can click the window key and period, and that kind of brings up your emojis. I'm on a Mac, and so I'm going to push the Command Control space bar. Each emoji is different for the operating system, but since you're watching me on a Mac, I'm going to go ahead and use that Mac reference, which is Command Control Spacebar, and find the music note. So Command Control Spacebar brings up this, and now I can type in music, and I can find my music note, and I can go ahead and insert that in there. I'm going to go ahead and hit the Save button, Command S or Control S, in order to save it. So now we can see that in our little browser preview, we now have the soundboard showing up. Now, one of the things that I would like to do in here is I would like to have this text be centered. And matter of fact, I want it to be centered on the entire project itself. So in the body, I'm going to go ahead and add the text align, and I want that to be center. So text-align, you can see that it's automatically popping up. And we want that to be center. And notice that we need to have a semicolon at the end of each one of these attributes. And I'm going to go ahead and save it. And now the soundboard is actually centered, which is really nice. All right. In the next lesson, we're going to cover how do we adjust the font of the soundboard. And we're going to pull that from Google Fonts, which is kind of neat. If you haven't gone through Google Fonts yet, it's really neat. Okay, so now that we have our header over here, our H1 tag with soundboard, let's go ahead and try to style it. We're going to style it with a Google font, as well as change a few colors, as well as the font size to get it to line up to what we had shown you at the very beginning. So in order to attack the h1 tag. As of right now, we have not given it an ID or a class, and as of right now, we really don't need to. We don't plan on having any other h1 tags on here, so in the style sheet, we can actually just do the following. We can say, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and do an h1 reference, and inside there, we're going to go ahead and say, hey, you know what? We want the font size to be 5 rem. So we're going to do font size 5 rem. And if we go ahead and save that, we should see that, hey, we just increased the size over there in the preview. So that looks good. The next item that we would like to do is we would like to add a color to this. So instead of black, we're going to go ahead and choose a little bit of a darker blue. So we'll do color. And we're going to use, again, the hex code of 283149. And then we're going to put a semicolon at the end. All right. Again, we're going to save that, and we can kind of see what it looks like. So now it's a little bit of a darker blue to kind of offset a little. And then we're going to apply a text shadow. So we're going to do text-shadow. I'm going to hit the tab button for auto completion. And for it, we're going to give the shadow some depth by doing 3 pixels. We're going to do a 0. And then we're going to add in our color. And for this, we're going to use the hash or the hex code of DA0463, a nice hot pink, and we're going to go ahead and save it. So now that we can see that it gave us a little bit of a shadow, give a little bit of depth on this for the text shadow. Now, the next thing that we would like to do is we would actually like to change the font family to something that Google provides us. So if we head over to Google and type in Google Fonts. So I just typed in Google Fonts inside of the browser just to search for it, and we're going to go ahead and click on this link here. Now, the font that we're going to be interested in is called Arvo, A-R-V-O. And you can see that if you really wanted, you can pick any style of font that you really wish, but we just chose this one because it looked okay. So A-R-V-O in the search box, and we can click on this. All right, now it says, well, what style would you like to use? And we're going to pick the very first one here, the regular 400, and I'm going to go ahead and click on select this style. Now, the best thing about Google, it provides you with all the code really necessary for us to apply this to our project. So it says on here, we want to first embed this in the head of our HTML. So again, we're going to copy this. So Command-C or Control-C on Windows, and we need to apply that again to the head of our HTML. So I'm going to go back to our index file inside the head. I'm going to apply this right after the title, and I'm going to paste that. Okay. Now, if this looks a little bit weird for you, you can apply word wrap if you wish, and that's under the hamburger menu, view, and then we have word wrap. And that way you don't have to scroll across the screen if that's looking a little funky for you. All right, so we have now linked the Google font to our page. Now it's time to actually use it. And for this, I'm going to go back over here to our CSS rules, and I'm going to copy this. Okay, so I'm going to copy the font family item that we see right here, and we're going to apply that to our CSS. So I'm going to kind of come over here, and at the end of my line 9, I'm going to hit the Enter key, and I'm going to paste exactly what Google told me to put in here. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the Save button, and you can kind of see that it automatically updated our font, which is kind of neat. All right, so we have now completed our header section of the tag here, the H1 of the soundboard, and we learned how to target it and style it in this lesson here. All right. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to apply some buttons, and then we're going to style those buttons as well as we're going along. All right, and hopefully you'll start seeing the pattern here. All right, so let's go ahead and add our first button. Now, where I'm going to put this is right after the soundboard, and I'm going to hit the Enter key, and I'm just going to type the tag button. And in here, we're just going to type the letter W, okay, and we're going to save that. So with that saved, we can kind of see that we have this tiny little button here, and now it's time to style that button because we're going to be placing several buttons on this HTML page for the W key, the A, S, D, and J. So if somebody actually types on that button, then our sound should play. So first, let's go ahead and add a class name to this button. And we're going to do class equals, and then we're going to call this icons, okay? Because eventually we're going to want to put some icon photos on here, and this will make a great class name for this. All right. All right. So now that we have the class name icons, now we can actually attack or start applying some styles to this button. And for that, we'll go to the style sheet. And again, remember from our previous lessons, if we want to attack or target the class, we always want to start it with a period. Okay, so we're going to hit the period, and then we're going to type in icons. And then we're going to do the open and closing curly braces and give us some room for us to start typing. All right, so what are some things that we want to style on here? Well, let's go ahead and make sure that we have a size on here. So we're going to do width of 150 pixels. And then we're going to do a height of 150 pixels. Okay, so go ahead and save that. So now we kind of have a nice square button. The next thing that we're going to do here is let's go ahead and remove the outline. So we're going to do outline none. So that way it kind of removes an outline once we apply it. We're going to do a border of 10 pixels. We're going to make it solid. And we're going to choose the color here of D2, DAE2. We can save that. The next thing that we're going to do is we need the font size. Let's increase the font size of that W. So we'll do font size. And we'll make that 5 REM. Save that. So now we have the large W. Let's go ahead and make our font family exactly what we see here on the H1. So I'm going to copy that and paste that down here. Save it. We can see our W is now changed. Let's go ahead and alter the color of this. And we're going to set that to the hot pink that we saw up there earlier. So DA0463. We'll save that. And now we can see that we have that. We're going to go ahead and do the text shadow of this. So we'll do text shadow. And we're going to set this to 3 pixels. 0. And then we're going to do the color of really like an off-white, but DBED F3. There we go. And we'll definitely see this once we apply an image to the background. We're going to apply a border, radius, We're going to set that to 15 pixels. Save it. You notice that we're getting a little softer of the button. We're going to do text align center. And then we're going to set a margin on here of 10 pixels all around. And then we'll just make sure that we choose a background color of white, just in case our image has any kind of transparencies associated with it. And for this, we can actually type the word white instead of giving it a hex. And the display, we're going to do inline block. And we'll see why we'll need this here once we have more buttons on there. And I believe that is it, minus the background size. We're going to set that to 125 by 125. And again, we'll show you here in a future video why we need to have that along with the background repeat. To set to no repeat. Okay, so later on we're going to comment these out to kind of show you what they did, but that should give us a good starting point here. Okay, so now that we've styled one of these, what I would like everybody to kind of do for maybe like a little personal challenge is let's go ahead and do the same exact thing that we did for the W. Okay, and let's create the buttons for A, S, D, and J. So I'll go ahead and stop this video here, and then in the next video we'll go ahead and proceed with what you should have completed. All right, so hopefully you were able to complete that challenge, and really quickly we can just do the exact same thing that we did before that you see on my line 17, which is a button tag. And inside here, we're going to type the letter A and save it. Notice that it is not the same style as our W, and that's because we have not applied the class over here. So I'm going to do class equals icons, and we'll save that. And now you'll see that, hey, it looks exactly like our W button. And again, we can just go ahead and apply the same thing a couple more times. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the Enter key and paste that in there. And after the W, we have S. And then after the S, we have D. And then we have the J button. So we'll add one more button here. And we'll put that in here like so. And I'll go ahead and hit the save button. And we now have every single one of those buttons on there. Now the next thing that we will do in the following video is we're going to start looking at applying another class on here, so that way, we can target the icons as well as far as background images and get in it to communicate with the JavaScript file so that when we actually hit those buttons, the sound is played. Okay, so now that we have all the buttons on the page, now it's going to be time to apply the images that you saw at the very beginning, right? So for the W, we want the door closed. Now, where are all those images being stored at? Well, they're actually right here in the image folder, like we talked about in the overview video. We're going to be referencing these icons or these images and applying it to the background that we have provided for each one of the buttons. Now, because the background image is different for each one of these, we can't simply apply the background image to the class of icons. Instead, it would be better to have an ID attribute added to the button so that we can target it with CSS. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and do the ID. And I'm going to set that equal to W, for example. Okay, and then I'm going to continue this pattern along with the other buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick, and we'll catch you back up once we're ready for the CSS. All right, so we're all caught up. This is what you should see. Again, we shouldn't really see anything visually different happening on your actual HTML page, but this does give us some targeting points to kind of attack when we're looking with the CSS. So let's go ahead and jump over to the CSS tab. So the styles CSS, that's where we'll be. And here, in order to target the W, for example, with the close door, we want to use the hashtag or the #, and then W. Okay, and we're going to add the curly boys, the opening and closing curly boys. Now, the hashtag here represents, hey, we're trying to target this one right here and this one only. Okay, so what do we want to do inside here? Well, I always like to reference a little bit of documentation. In the W3 schools over here, we can apply a background image, and this is how we would do it. Okay, and it says on here, the background image property sets one or more background images for an element. By default, the background image is placed on the top left corner of the element, and it is repeated both vertically and horizontally. So that's something to kind of note here, is the vertically and horizontally. We'll show you in the CSS where we have specified that we don't want the repeat to happen, because what if the image just doesn't get contained in our button properly, and we would see that image kind of repeat over and over and over again. So back to our code here. So inside here, the background image, again, the documentation tells us in order to apply a background image, this is the CSS attribute that we're going to attach, and we can supply a URL, and in our case, it's going to be a reference to an image that we've already have. All right, so let me go ahead and show you what that looks like, and then we can kind of apply this pattern for you as a challenge to kind of go through the rest of these. Okay, so the W, we're going to do the background image, and we want that to be of the URL, and inside here, this is where we're going to put in basically a file folder reference. So when we look at this file folder structure, it is in the images folder. So I'm going to go ahead and type in images, and then I'm going to put slash, because it's inside that folder, and this is the one where I want to be the door. Okay, and it's door.png. Okay, so once I save that, we should be able to see a door icon appear right here on our soundboard file. All right, okay, so here is the following that we need to do for the challenge is, let's go ahead and apply the different icons that we have for each one of the keys that are going to be pressed. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit of notes on here so that way you know exactly what keys need to have what image. All right. All right, so here is your notes. The A button is for the water, the S button is for the drums, the D button is for the keys, and the J button is for the lock. So as a challenge, let's go ahead and see if you can actually complete that, and in the next video, we're going to go ahead and go through it. Okay, so hopefully you were able to knock out that challenge fairly easy without any issues. We're going to go ahead and go through it. So the next one that we're going to do is we're going to do the A. All right, and the A does get the water spigot, so that's going to be background image with the URL, and that's going to be the water PNG. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. The next one is going to be the drum set, so that's going to be on the letter S, right? So we're going to go ahead and almost do the exact same thing. We're going to use that hashtag and S, curly boys, and then it's going to be the background image with the drum set. Okay. Now the next one is going to be the hashtag D, curly boys, and again we're going to do the background image, but not the drums. It's going to be the keys. Okay. So we'll save that. We'll get our S, we'll get our D, And then the last one here is going to be the lock, and that's going to be the hashtag J. And we're going to do the background image of the lock. All right, so go ahead and save all that. Now we should have a good, as far as icons go, letters go, they're all on top, and everything looks really good at this point. So hopefully you were able to complete that challenge of simply adding some more CSS, utilizing the ID identifier, and then adjusting the background image to match the images that we have provided for you. All right. So the last thing that we're going to go ahead and add to this is a footer. And so we can go in here and create a footer tag. Hit the tab button, and we're just going to put in here made with coding knowledge. All right, so when we save this, we'll kind of see it down here at the bottom, but wouldn't it be nice for it to give it a little bit of margin as well as a little bit of color, right? So let's go ahead and kind of go to the styling sheet and see what we can do to alter it. All right, so how do we target the footer? Well, all we have to do is type footer and open up the curly boys. And next we're going to type out color. And for this we're going to do the hashtag DBEDF3, and we'll put a semicolon there. We'll save that. So now we have some nice white text. Now what if we wanted to push down the margin on here so that it gives a little bit of space between the buttons as well as the footer block? So for that, we can go to margin top, and let's give it 15 pixels and see what that does. You can see now it is pushed down just a little bit. All right. Okay, so that finalized our HTML page, and the next video we're just going to go ahead and test everything out to make sure that the buttons work and the sound files work and everything else. Okay. All right, so this is going to be the video going a little bit over what happens if you don't hear any sounds or anything like that when we go through these. So if you were to click on any one of these buttons and you're not hearing a sound, obviously make sure that your sound is turned up. The next thing to kind of check is, well, in order for the sound files to work when we click the button, we want to make sure that we have this spelled out correctly, which is the icons, I-C-O-N-S. If we name this something other than icons, then your JavaScript file may not work because it's looking for this to be spelled out properly. Okay, so that is one of the things to double check on why it's not working when you press the button physically on your soundboard. Otherwise, everything else should kind of work as is. If you were to hit the W key, you should hear the door slam, the A, the water drip, the S, the drums, and the D keys, and the J, the lock. But as of right now, everything should be working if you followed the lesson properly and you have identified this as a class for that JavaScript file to work. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed this lesson of the soundboard. It's going to be really neat for you to kind of play around with this, rewatch the videos if you want, and make sure that you check out those documentations that we kind of shared with you, whether that be MDN documentation as well as W3 Schools are really great sources for you to explore. And again, kind of make this your own with your own CSS file, right? If you want, change the background color of the entire body, change the color of the text, play around with the text shadow, okay? So don't always go with what we give you in the video. Try to tweak it out and make it your own for sure. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed this lesson. and we'll see you the next time.